Hey guys, in this video we're going to be looking at custom trees. Small, medium to mega, I'll have you covered, and we'll even be looking at other builders' designs in order to give you the most comprehensive overview possible, so stick around for that. Some techniques will require plugins and I'll introduce those as we go. Let's dive into it. I'm going to start with textures. A mistake that inexperienced builders might make is to pair oak shaping blocks with oak logs. What we actually want to do is match the colours as close as we can. A great example of this is pairing cherry logs with the nether brick shaping blocks, as they match rather well. Using these shaping blocks effectively is going to be fundamental to improving your trees. My next tip is to use a reference. With thousands of real-life trees to choose from and the power of the Pinterest search bar, finding an image that you can use to reference proportions, colours and details is a piece of cake and highly recommended. So how do we turn this into this? Keeping it simple with a straight trunk at first, you can see how I've thickened out the roots of the tree using stairs, slabs, walls, fences and even glass panes. The trick is to use smaller shapes as you move upwards so that the roots curve outwards. For this particular tree, I've staggered some branches on either side and then crowned it with lots of branches at the top, splitting away from the main trunk. I've shaped the branches from full blocks to fences and fence gates, splitting the branches into 2 or 3 branchlets as they move outwards, angled in all directions somewhat equally overall. If you want a non-linear trunk, make good use of the shaping blocks when smoothly transitioning between full blocks. In this interesting example, you can see how I've curved the roots around another object using lots of stairs, fence gates and trapdoors. You can speed up your leaf placement by using a welded sphere brush of mostly air, say 80 to 90%. Having a high percentage of air is really significant for recreating a natural bushy texture. This won't be applicable to every type of tree though, and we'll look at other methods later. Hand placing will always get a good result. When colouring your leaves, you can replace the blocks randomly or apply a noise pattern such as purling. And you don't have to limit yourself to just leaf blocks. Glass works really well, but honestly you can get away with using any opaque block due to those air gaps. Some simple survival-friendly details that you can add include buttons for tree knobs, glass panes for vines and candles for leaves. Additionally, you can place grass on top of moss blocks, whilst below them you can add cave lines. Using the Builder's Utilities plugin to prevent block updates, we can start to add much more interesting details. Vines can now be made out of any flower block. Natural blocks can be added floating in mid-air and corals no longer dry out. Pink petals can even be placed on water. But not all trees are this classic oak shape. For my custom pine/spruce trees, I build a linear trunk with a slightly thicker base, then put 3 branches on spaced out levels, gradually getting shorter towards the top. Then I shape the leaves by hand, add some variation, and detail with candles, ferns, saplings, and snow. These palm trees have very curved trunks and 2 levels of elongate hand-placed leaves along the straight and diagonal angles. On some of them, I've even used custom heads to detail coconuts. For my swamp trees, I've built relatively thick roots, and used 4 to get glow lichen in block form, finishing off the details with various dead corals and fans. At some point I experimented with some alien tree designs and cooked up these, and I think that they're great examples of how your custom trees can be unique. I love the modular leaf design of this one, the complementary colours here, and the fact that I've put brewing stands in this one and it kinda works. One of the great things about trees is that they can be used as templates for different coloured varieties. For example, from my oak tree assets, I've produced my jungle trees and nether trees simply by replacing the blocks. Finally, for dead trees, you're obviously going to have exposed branches. Therefore, I would recommend shaping them with slabs and trapdoors in order to recreate their bare, jagged shapes. Now that we've got a decent overview on designing trees, we can go bigger. Most of my trees are on the smaller side, so it's time to bring in some help. Abel has provided us with some gorgeous redwoods and an excellent example of gradually scaling up trees. Although the colouring of the trunk is generally uniform, the subtle variations create a lovely bark-like texture. Then these diagonally sloping mossy slabs emphasise the shape of the branches, which themselves are detailed via some clever floating blocks. An improved example of palm trees would be this amazing collection from Mr. Matt Ranger. On the trunk, I'll point out a unique use of the composter that works perfectly for the bark, and these wonderful open fence gate and pot details. Then the fronds are textured through a gradient of leaves, reflecting how the sun would hit them, with carefully placed moss blocks providing natural details, and the whole thing is survival friendly of course. Moving into the realm of fantasy, we have this incredible purple tree built by Fu. These vines and floating details are fantastic because they really make the build feel magical. And how could I not mention the outstanding gradient work across these leaves, trunk, and even down to these rocks. Everything is then topped off with brilliant colour matched shaping blocks to give a smooth curving appearance. To make the base shape of this style of tree, you can use Archeon's spike command. This utilises For's convex selection, which simply allows you to select more than 2 points. In this case, these selected points form a curve in 3D space. Archeon is a premium plugin, but you can use it for free on the Bakery creative server, even on Bedrock. The Bakery Discord is an amazing community of builders and content creators. You might recognise a few of them. I don't know how I got here, but I'll take it. Finally, I'll showcase Beaconite's beautiful creative work. With bigger custom trees comes a lot more space to texture, and this is such an excellent example of shading through various colours. Now, these leaves may appear random, but closer inspection reveals a very deliberate and well executed placement of greenery. I think this one speaks for itself. Recently, I've been making a lot of Star Wars builds, and I really want to recreate the Battle of Kashyyyk, which will require these giant trees called rushes. For a trunk of this scale, I decided to layer spike commands to recreate the feeling of twisting bark. I also added a couple lower branches referring to this image and accidentally recreated this pose, as someone in my Discord server pointed out. In terms of texturing, there are a few techniques that you can use. The first is a simple random replacement. For whites and blacks it can look okay, but for colours I don't recommend doing this, especially on a large scale. So I actually opted for some angle replacement, setting the angles between 0 and 50 degrees to be jungle wood. But this approach wasn't perfect, and so I went over the tree with a sphere brush marked to solid blocks and painted in the darker jungle wood blocks where I wanted to highlight the bark texture as well as the shadows. Then I replaced the oak wood with a purlin noise pattern. There are a couple ways of doing leaves. The first is to make a few giant leaf assets and then paste them around the build, which works really well for upscale trees. But this approach requires a lot more effort, which is why I don't have an example of it. Instead, I opted for using a sphere brush like before. You'll see that I go back and add a few more branches once I had brushed in most of the leaves, and this was simply to fill in any gaps where the upper branches appeared too exposed. Once I was happy with the overall shape of the leaves, I actually ran a command on the whole structure to replace half of the air above the spruce leaves with green stained glass. I think that this improved the colouring whilst keeping the shading the same as it was before, since glass is transparent. And at this point I was pretty much done. However, the great thing about building at this scale is that you can spend as much time as you like going around and improving the shaping by hand. This tree took me about an hour or two to make, but then I likely spent an extra couple hours just removing hanging blocks and filling in holes. For me, that's what makes the difference. Congratulations to for winning my tree building competition, which was streamed live on Twitch. All of my builds are available on Patreon, and you can keep up to date with my projects on Instagram too. Please consider dropping a sub if you learned something today, because there is just so much more that I want to make for you guys on this platform. Thanks for watching.